Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Child Anxiety FAQ podcast. FAQ stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and I'm answering audience questions about child and teen anxiety. My name is Dawn Friedman, and I've been working with kids and families for more than 30 years as a preschool teacher, family case manager, parent educator, clinical counselor, and now as the owner and operator of Child Anxiety Support, where I coach parents of anxious kids. And this week's question continues on the theme we have been talking about these past few episodes, which is all around anger and guilt and lots of big feelings about child anxiety. And this question gets summed up as, how do I help my anxious child understand their feelings of resentment and blame toward me as a parent? Which is a really big question. I'll give you some background. The person who submitted this has a young teen, and they're really struggling with creating those anxiety exposures, getting out of the parenting pitfalls. And their child is not liking it and is getting very angry with their parent, which is understandable. The thing that makes this particular answer a little challenging for this family is their child is a young teen, and it is developmentally appropriate for the child to be pushing back against their parent because this is an age of separation. Developmentally, that's what kids are doing at this age. They are becoming more peer-oriented, and there tends to be more conflict with parents. Now, I am not one of those people who tell you, oh, you need to dread the teen years, because that's just not true. Every age is hard for different reasons. Every age has joys for different reasons. But certainly the ages where there is a need for separation, where that is part of the relationship, are more challenging ages, in part because the kids still need us, but they don't want us. And that can happen when they're 2. You know how people post those memes sometimes, or they'll post on social media and say, my kid is melting down because I had the audacity to pack the wrong size goldfish crackers, that kind of thing. That happens because the child is learning to separate. And in that separation, there's often resentment. At a certain point, toddlers go from just being thrilled with whatever you give them. You know, I ask for food and my parents give me food. That's a miracle. To all of a sudden, it crosses a line for them, and they start wanting you to psychically know that when they ask for food, you should know exactly the magical food they want and when they want it and how they want it and if you served it right or whatever. And I call that the bent banana stage, because that's the age your child asks for a banana and it needs to be exactly the right curve and the right color, and you either have to start it or not start it, or peel it or not peel it. And you never know, and you're always going to get it wrong, because it's not about the banana. It's about the child's need for control and separation and the resentment, the push-pull of it. So you see that in teenagers too. You see that at different ages in different ways. When this parent is talking about their child's resentment, it could be because the parent is pushing the child to confront their anxiety. I'm sure that's part of it. And it also can be that this child is trying to separate. That means that it's not an easy fix, because it is a growing developmental stage. And if it is just about the anxiety, it's still not an easy fix, because the child is sublimating their anxiety about facing their anxiety and making it about you and your relationship with them. There's another piece of this question I wanted to talk about too, which is, how do I help my anxious child understand their feelings? And I wanted to say that we can invite our children the opportunity to understand their feelings, but that doesn't mean they're going to take the invite. It doesn't mean they're interested in the invite. They might just want to be mad. And who's easy to be mad at? But us, their parents. We are easy targets. I think there is something else to dive into here. I am all about parents being bigger than these kinds of developmental learning conflicts, whether it's because the child is 13 or 14 and starting to push back at the parent, whether it's because the child is so anxious and they're taking it out on their parent. I encourage parents to be bigger than that conflict, which does not mean we don't hold children responsible for their behavior. Absolutely, we hold children responsible for their behavior, but we can be bigger than their behavior and see developmentally what's happening. When there's other stuff going on, like a developmental pushback or dealing with anxiety, to ask our children to have insight might be too much to ask. So let's say instead, how do we invite them to understand their feelings of resentment and blame? And the answer to that is, in part, we don't do it when they're mired in resentment and blame. We can certainly hold them responsible for the behavior. You may not speak to me that way. That would be, we can push back on that. But they're allowed to have those feelings. They're allowed to feel resentment. They're even allowed to feel blame because they get to feel however they want to feel. When things are not tense, when things are not difficult, when we're not trying to do the thing, then we can have a conversation. I will share that in working with young teens, especially, who are often surprised at how frustrated they get with their parents or how resentful they are, because they love their parents and they don't like being in conflict. Often one of the things I would do with them is share with them that that is part of being a child, is pushing for separation, and that there are times of conflict, and it doesn't mean that they're a bad kid, and it doesn't mean they have a bad parent. It means they are supposed to be growing, and kids and parents do ultimately grow apart in healthy, loving ways. And sometimes that gets very messy. I share that with teens because it makes it easier for them not to visit it on their parents or to feel guilty that they're having those feelings, which can make them defensive and more negative. So that's one thing you can share with your kid. Your 13 or 14-year-old who is struggling with you pushing them out of the parenting pitfalls, you can say, this is coming at a challenging time for us. You are trying to grow away. And when I step in with things, that frustrates you. That's normal. That's just kind of how it is. The other thing is, specifically about anxiety, is explaining to them that we are responsible for our behavior, which is to say, we are responsible for maintaining the parenting pitfalls. That's why they're called the parenting pitfalls, not the kid pitfalls. An example would be, if I lay down with you every night because you don't like to sleep alone, I'm the one who's choosing to do that. That's on me. So when I say to my child, I am no longer going to lay down with you, I am taking responsibility for that. I am not laying down with you anymore because it's not helping you learn to sleep on your own. That's on me. That's on me that I am doing something that is not helping you. It is understandable that we might resent our kids for needing us to lay down with them, just as it is fair for them to resent us when we don't. However, it is not fair to push that resentment and make it the child's responsibility, or for them to push the resentment and make it our responsibility. That means instead of focusing on the resentment our child might have for us, we can focus on their behaviors that evidence that resentment, just as we can only focus on our behaviors when we feel resentful. I'm hoping this makes sense here. Letting them know the limits and expectations we have around their behavior and how they express their feelings, because they can feel any kind of way. They cannot behave any kind of way. And also taking responsibility for our own behaviors. If I say to my child, I am no longer laying down with you at night because it is time for you to figure out how to sleep alone, and the child is resentful about that, we can say, I understand it's not what you would prefer. I can only manage my own behaviors, and my behavior of laying down with you is not working for me anymore, and it's not working for you anymore. Now, you can be really mad at me about that, but you may not yell at me and tell me what a terrible parent I am. Or you can write me an angry letter, but you may not scream at me during dinner. However you would like to let them know how can they appropriately express their anger And again, expressing their anger does not mean we need to take on their anger. If your child writes you a note that says, I think you're the meanest parent in the world because you won't lay down with me, you can just say, I understand you're really, really, really upset with me. We don't need to take that on and say, how can you be angry at me? That's not fair. That hurt my feelings. They can be angry with us, and writing a letter, that there are worse ways to express our anger than that. So I know that's kind of a complicated answer. I feel like it's a kind of complicated question. Do you have a question you would like to ask for the podcast? You can do that by going to childanxietysupport.com. And I also wanted to share that I do have something called Borrow My Brain, which is if you want a really specific answer for your specific family. And you can go and look at that. It's a cheap way to work with me and get a quick but detailed answer in some direction about an issue you're facing with your anxious child. It's kind of a one and done thing. And I modeled that on very often clinically, I would have parents reach out to me because they think their child would need therapy. And they would come to that first session and we would do an elaborate intake and interview. And I would give them some resources and some information and new ways of looking at things. And they would say, you know what? I don't think our family actually needs therapy. I think we just needed this information. And they were one and done, and it was great and fantastic. And this is a virtual way of doing that with families. So you can check it out. That's at childanxietysupport.com. Borrow My Brain. Okay, I'll see you next week.